let us move into a time of recognition. A time of recognition that we have arrived, I believe we long ago arrived, at a time when interspirituality, the gifts of all the world's great traditions and religions, are available to all of us now. And I know that for many of us, there are wounds, there are judgments, there are just straight up resistance to some faith traditions. We may consider ourselves anti-Christian. We may consider ourselves anti-organized religion. But what I want to invite you into is a heart opening, a mind opening to the gifts that are available in all of these great traditions. And as we celebrate the Christian tradition of Easter and resurrection, the death and the resurrection and what remains is essential. That way of love that can never die. And the liberation and freedom of the Jews and the great exodus from Egypt as we celebrate Passover. But I recognize that some of us can't get to the heart opening, the mind opening, and the receiving of the gifts from some of these traditions because of the woundedness we may have as a result of bad behavior from religious leaders, the missteps, the harm, and the hurt created by religious leaders. And so I would like to take a moment right now and apologize. I am so sorry that we, my colleagues, clergy in many faith traditions, have hurt and harmed you. Please accept my apology for any hurt and harm you may have experienced as a result of involvement in any organized religion. And please accept my invitation, my heart-filled invitation into the interspirituality that is available now to all of us, this global access we have to the wisdom and the beauty that lies in all these great traditions. It is why I find myself standing before you now as clergy in the science of mind in this incredible teaching that has dedicated itself to the golden thread that runs through all of the great faith traditions and philosophies of the world. Thank you. Because I wanted to make sure that you were able to hear today some of the wisdom from our Jewish and Christian ancestors. Because as I was preparing this talk, I was aware that in this time of pandemic, in this time of crisis, we have so much we can learn from these teachings. We have so much we can learn right now and take and use in this time. And I know we're sad. I know we are grieving. I know that we didn't get to gather in the ways we would normally gather this time of year. Seders have become tiny or virtual. And Easter dinner today may be happening through Zoom or just with your household. And so I want to acknowledge that grief. I want to acknowledge that sadness. And I also want to acknowledge that this is an opportunity to look deeply at these traditions and stories. I want to share one of the pieces from Seder and Passover celebration that I was reading a lot this week, which is there's a practice in Passover, in the Jewish tradition, during this time where there is a daily prayer of thanksgiving. And this daily prayer of thanksgiving is often said twice a day. But one of the pieces of that prayer that really stood out to me was this line, which is in Psalms 118. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. And man, does that feel true right now, right? Doesn't it seem like all that may be crumbling around us, all that we may be losing, all that seems like it is dying in this moment is heartbreaking and sad and difficult. And there is this revealing of cornerstones that I don't know we have truly valued until this very moment. And I'm thinking about the low-wage workers, the marginalized folks who often fill those jobs, those delivery drivers, those cashiers, those grocery store clerks, those stocking clerks, are cornerstones we've recognized of late. And in our capitalist global society, those cornerstones have often been rejected. Whole groups of people have been rejected, marginalized, left out of the main story. And yet, in this twice daily prayer, in the Jewish Passover, we honor the once rejected cornerstone that is now holding it down for us, that is now foundational to our lives. And I see that as a recognition of the inherent unity that we actually belong to. The recognition of the connectedness and the reliance and interdependence we have on each other. And when we allow ways of being to die and bring into the fold, into the front of our minds, into the front of our experience, the truth of our inherent oneness, and let that rise up, we begin to liberate ourselves. We begin to taste real freedom. Liberation means to release something from confinement. That incredible story of the Jews exiting, being released from Egypt, and released from confinement, released from slavery. But I'll tell you what, that liberation does not come easy. As I was reading the story of Exodus in the Hebrew Scriptures, I was really struck by all the plagues that had to happen first. I mean, it wasn't just like one day where the frogs suddenly took over the entire existence of Egypt. I mean, it was frogs, it was locusts. I mean, it was plague after plague after plague. And then liberation. Liberation is often ripe with difficulty, suffering, sadness, grief, loss, and joy, and a sense of expansion and possibility. It's not just one or the other. And I was reading in Exodus as well, this story of the journey once they were liberated from Egypt, and the Israelites were led by Moses and his comrades through this incredible journey. And one of the things I found myself noticing in the story was there was a lot of complaining along the way. Not just a little bit, but a lot of complaining along the way. And I recognized in my judgment initially, I was like, wow, we've got to make room for how hard it is sometimes. We've got to give voice to the difficulty so that then we can continue to move forward. And what I noticed, though, was along the way, when it got hard, when it wasn't clear that there was going to be food or water, Moses, as a leader in this time, in this journey, in this travel, in this liberation, always responded to those complaints, to those fears, by turning within and getting into conversation with Spirit. Always turned to prayer, every time. And it wasn't that Moses turned to his followers and said, y'all, can we just take a minute and remember that we are now not slaves? Can we maybe reel in the bitching just a bit? No. He turned to prayer. He turned to wisdom. And every time, in the face of fear and suffering, he turned to prayer and was given a solution. Every time without fail. I believe we have the very same possibility. That we have got to do that first thing, which is acknowledge it is scary and it is difficult. And we don't know how this is going to turn out. We don't know what the next step holds. But we can rely on this absolute love that is ever available in us. And like Moses, we can turn to prayer knowing we will be provided an answer. Knowing we will be provided a way forward. It is ours to maybe accept this very moment that we are being called into leadership, to lead this liberation journey, to allow what needs to crumble, crumble, to allow what needs to fall, fall, and be with what remains. We get to look at that metaphor that Jesus of Nazareth left in his dying breath. That yes, incredible suffering, incredible difficulty, and persecution cannot kill what is essential, cannot kill his message, cannot kill the way of love. He was the rock star of the way of love. And that message, that truth, only grew and rose to greater heights and reached more people. And it was not because it was some easy breezy road. It was not without incredible pain and suffering. And yet, what is essential rose, grew bigger, became greater, reached more. And we have something to learn from that. That in our resistance to what is difficult, in our resistance to letting fall and letting crumble what may need to, we often get in our own way of that prayer of possibility and solution that is waiting for us if we only turn to it. And so let us be like these leaders. Let us remember that we can make room for the grief and the pain and the difficulty and take that to that great love, to that great power, that great wisdom that lives in us, and be guided to the next right step, to the next blessing, to the next way forward. A friend of mine, Annette Sandberg, who was very critical in my early days of learning at what it is to be a spiritual being. And way back in my wee 20s, She introduced me to meditation and manifestation and spiritual principle. But recently, this week, she shared on social media this beautiful practice that she practiced, and I asked her if I could share it with you. And here's what she did. She said that she only invited herself into a place of host. And what she did is she said, today I hosted a listening circle for my rage. I only invited the kind and compassionate aspects of my nature. She was filled with sorrow and deep despair. We just held her fury and cried together. Hashtag COVID-19. But when we are strong enough to stand and hold in our own beings the pain and the suffering, and with compassion and all the love and patience, allow ourselves to be enraged, to be in grief, to be in loss, whatever we may be feeling, and having the courage to host a listening circle for your own self. Because it's when we have that courage and we go within with all of our wholeness, which includes all the feelings, and we make room, and we make compassion for ourselves. We then have the room and the space to also access the wisdom that is there, to access the strength required to follow that guidance we may be receiving. You know, I'm struck by these stories. Even Jesus of Nazareth had moments of questioning his own call. And Moses for sure was like, who, me? I'm supposed to lead some folks? Like, yes, you. Yes, you are being called to lead. And so we may be having to let our whole identities crumble. We may be having to let belief systems and structures within ourselves and our understanding crumble so that we can rise to the occasion, so that we can recognize and make real the divine, holy creatures that we are. Every single one of us. It is one of the great inheritance we each have right now in this time of the recognition of these golden threads running through all of these stories of our divinity, of our magnificence. You know, the purpose of Centers for Spiritual Living, which is what we belong to at the Albuquerque Center for Spiritual Living, the purpose of the whole thing is to awaken each of us to our spiritual magnificence. And these stories of Exodus, these stories of death and resurrection are there to serve our awakening if we let them. They're also there to teach us some simple tools, some practices that we may take into our own lives so that we can be that magnificence that we actually are, so that we can be the whole of ourselves. But I'm recognizing in this idea that the rejected cornerstone that is now the foundational cornerstone isn't just true collectively. It's also true individually. We may be needing to let crumble ideas we had about who we are and what we should be up to, and claim more fully, more foundationally, the truth of who we are. There may be aspects in ourselves that we have rejected. There may be aspects of ourselves that we just simply put on the shelf because we'd gotten so busy in our lives. We may need to reject now ways of being and ideas of who we were. We may have seen ourselves as a problem because we were introverts. And yet, look around. Introverts are like, I've been waiting for an invitation to spend days alone. And that introverted nature is now foundational for that person. There may be some of us who forgot or didn't realize how nurturing we actually are because we'd gotten so busy. And now that nurturing nature in us is central to our days. We may have forgotten how kind we actually are because we had been running to and fro. And yet, it is rising to the occasion in these incredible ways all over the planet. We may have forgotten that joy is our natural way of being. And yet it is bubbling up in this pause, in this opening that has been provided to us. And so I invite us to make whole our visions of ourselves, to welcome back into the fold those pieces we may have put on the shelf and allow them to become foundational again, and to let crumble what needs to crumble. I want to share from Ernest Holmes, the founder of Science of Mind. The wall which keeps me from the greater good is built of mental blocks, cemented together by fear and unbelief, mixed in the mortar of negative experience. Now, you are to tear down this wall, to completely destroy it. I now discover that self which has never wholly left its heaven. I now discover the self that has never left heaven. Because heaven is right here, right now, as we create it, as we make room for it, as we let die what needs to die, as we accept our liberation from what has been confining us and claim our true freedom. Free means to permanently remove what binds us, what confines us, to permanently remove what oppresses us. Permanently. And so, the way I see it is we got to get liberated first, right? We got to even recognize that we've been in an enslaved place, that we've been held down by some idea or circumstance. And not only do we have to liberate ourselves of that, we then must continue to move forward so that we may permanently remove all that is in the way. We destroy the walls that keep us from our good. We destroy the ways of being that have created the negative experience, the fear, the cement and the mortar of these walls of misbelief and misunderstanding. Permanently remove what binds us. That is freedom. So that we can bring our holy, whole selves to the occasion. So that we can rise up forever undoing what must be undone, forever revealing that beautiful heaven, that gorgeous nirvana, that absolute love that is the truth of all things. That is what I believe this season we find ourselves in is inviting us to. And so I ask you, and you can put it right now in the feed, put it in the comments. Is there something crumbling in your life that feels scary or difficult or hard that may be your route to liberation? Put it in the feed. Put it out there. Because I guarantee you, we are all experiencing loss right now. We are all experiencing grief. But if we choose to just shift our perspective that little bit and recognize a wall is coming down that is affording us a liberated way forward, maybe all of a sudden that suffering and that pain and that difficulty are incredibly worthwhile. And I know that we can say yes to this leadership call we're experiencing, to this call to guide one another through this journey of liberation. The other part of the story in Exodus that really struck me in the Hebrew scripture was there was a moment in the journey where the Israelites had to go into battle. And it was a difficult battle. And during the battle, Moses knew that he needed to hold the high watch. He needed to stay totally connected to spirit. And so he went on a hillside and rose his arms so that he could stay connected. And he stayed there all day through this battle. And every time he had his arms raised, the Israelites prevailed. But his arms got tired. And his homies, Aaron and Hur, gave him a rock to sit on. And then they each stood on each side of him holding up his arm. And the other stood on the other side holding up his other arm. So that connection wouldn't be lost. And I recognize that we get tired and we get weary. And we rely on each other to hold up our arms, to provide someone a resting place. And so a call into leadership, a call to be a voice of hope and love, doesn't mean you are alone in it. Doesn't mean you must always be strong or even know what the next right step is. But it does mean you are willing to say yes to the call, and you are willing to share your weariness. You are willing to let somebody hold up your arms when they get tired. That is part of this time. We are all Moses. We are all Aaron and Hur. We are all the ones who freak out in the middle of the journey and don't know if we're going to make it. And maybe we should go back. We are all the ones who cry out when it feels like it is all falling apart, and then surrender ourselves to whatever is next, knowing we will rise, knowing there is an ultimate truth that has never, ever, ever abandoned us. And it is here for you and for every one of us. And so I ask you in this holy, holy season, are you leading? Are you needing guidance? Do you know? where you land right now? And are you willing to share it? Share your guidance. Share your fears. Share your whole, holy self. Give yourself to this moment in history. We need you. And I love you so much. So much. So let's take a moment and anchor this in prayer. If you are willing, you can close your eyes right where you are. You can whisper to your beloved who may be sitting with you right now, I love you so much. You are wholly whole, my darling. And know this truth with me, that there is only one. There is only love. And when we each move into this truth more fully, when we each rise to the occasion of our own hearts, we reveal the heaven on earth that we all long for. We reveal that place of nirvana, that place of absolute intelligence, right here on this planet, together. And I know that whatever difficulty, whatever plagues us, Spirit is there, ready and waiting, in our own beings, guiding us, lifting us, holding up our arms, so that the good that we are can come more forward. And the good that is ours, is our birthright, flows freely to us. Because that is what is happening right now. And I am so grateful for the love that we are, for the truth that we are. And I just let it be. I let it be in that absolute intelligence and that absolute love, and continue to blossom like the flowers of spring. That is so good. It is very good. And it is so. I love you.